you can just type anytime. You can raise your hand, and I'm also going to be sharing links that Leslie is going to be referring to during her presentation. So if there's anything, you might want to keep an eye on that. Good. So welcome. And today's presentation is should you move your geospatial data processes to the cloud? So the point here is not to convince you that you should or that you shouldn't, but more what are the things to consider if you're asking yourself this question? Because it might not always be the best solution depending on your situation. So at the end of this presentation, we want to make sure that you have all the right tools to take the right decision for you and your organization. So let me introduce you Leslie McKenzie. She graduated from McGill University with a Bachelor of Arts and Geography. She's passionate about geomatics and has been working in the field for over 15 years. At ConsorTech, Leslie provides consulting, training, and solution design services on various GIS and IT platforms, including Safe Software, FME Desktop, and FME Server. Her motivation lies in helping her customers develop automated data workflow processes so they can focus on the fun stuff, the real GIS work. Leslie was one of the first specialists in North America to obtain Safe Software's FME Certified Trainer and FME Certified Professional certifications. So hi, Leslie.
Hi.
So I'm going to go through the agenda really quickly. We're going to have a quick introduction with Leslie. Then she'll go over data processing using the cloud. She'll show you a few questions to ask and the considerations to take when you take the decision. And we'll conclude with questions. But throughout the whole presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. So just real quick, I'm going to tell you a bit more about ConsorTech, who we are. We've been in business for 30 years now. It's actually our 30th anniversary. We're data integrators with an expertise in GIS. Our team is made of 10 experts, which 6 of them are actually certified on FME. We've done over 100 projects through all with the point of making your life easier when you're trying to automate data workflows to make you save time and money. Also, we are the only Safe Software Platinum partner in North America. So, Leslie, here's to you.
Okay, so the objective that we have here today is just to give you some ideas of what to think about when you're thinking about moving your geodata processes to the cloud. So what we did is, like, in the last year, we had a bunch of clients kind of ask us these questions. And so what we did is, instead of presenting one project, like a lot of our presentations are, we're going to present, we kind of put together, what are we seeing happening all together. So it's really the accumulation of like different projects in different contexts, but what kind of repeats itself. And so we just want to provide this as a way to help you think about, all right, I want to do some stuff in the cloud. What do I need to think about? And kind of some of the experiences we've had in the past year. So I'm going to start with just really quickly, just to put everybody in the right premise. So we are FME partners. So what does that mean? So, when I talk about geodata processes, it's really going to be a lot in the context of Safe Software's FME and FME Server, because that's our core business and that's what we do. But in general, when we see geodata processes, because these are a lot of these considerations are general things that we need to think about when going to the cloud. So just to make sure everybody's on the same frame of mind, I just put a screen cap here of what is FME Desktop. So this is what the FME software is. So here you can see that it's a data workflow where I have some sources coming in, I have a destination, and all of these blue boxes kind of linked together with arrows. These are transformers, and so they manipulate the data. So this is just an example very quickly of an FME data process. So when I talk about a data process or an FME script or an ETL, this is the idea of what I'm talking about. So FME Desktop lets me create these data processes. And FME Server is the enterprise version of this application. And this lets me take those FME data processes and deploy them in an enterprise-like way. So I can have them triggered automatically through schedules, through on-demand services, through web services. So it allows me to build automation around my data processes. So we are going to talk about both, because a lot of the time if we're thinking of moving things to the cloud, we're thinking about web services, we're thinking about automation, we're thinking about, putting things, in the hands of different people. So in the past, let's say about year or maybe a little bit more, we had an uptake of clients starting to ask us about the cloud. So for a lot of years, especially in Canada, a lot of people were kind of slow to moving towards the cloud. I would say that one of the things that triggered this interest is kind of the federal government's cloud adoption strategy. So I just put a link there if you guys are interested in looking more into what that is. But there is an interest in growing in using the cloud among our clientele. And, we see, so who is this clientele? So we're seeing a trend in the uptake in, government clients, in municipal clients, so different tiers of government, so especially federal government because of the cloud adoption strategy. And slowly the municipalities as well have been starting to expand their usage of the cloud. We see that especially through the use of applications. So especially through buying applications that are hosted in the cloud. A lot of the federal government clients that are looking, a lot of them are looking at building infrastructure in the cloud. So we'll talk about what those different options are and what that means. So what do these clients tend to do? They tend to already be users of FME and FME Server. Because a lot of them are clients that we've already been working with. So what do they do with their FME technology? It's a lot of production and publication of data. So a lot are using FME to do validation, to do integration, to do publication. So producing different data products that they put out there. So, I might have data in one form, but I'm actually producing different packages that, I either deliver to other specific clients or the public at large. So what happened is a bunch of clients came to us and said, yep, we're ready to go to the cloud. How do we do it? So I always put this moving screen cap here because the vision it brought to my head was everybody showing up with their suitcases and saying, all right, here's suitcases full of data, and saying, right, we're going to the cloud with our FME stuff and our data processes. How do we do it? But the answer is not quite as simple as, here are the 3 steps to get yourself into the cloud. There's a few considerations that have to be taken. So the first thing we said is, okay, well, why do you want to move to the cloud? And so lots of reasons, the typical reasons that I think people are used to. A lot of people, avoid IT, have more flexible architecture. So being able to offer external facing solutions to the public more easily. Some of them is because they do want to be at the forefront. They do want to be leaders and innovate. And some of them is because, there's the allure or the draw of maybe we'll save money. So, lots of reasons. And one of the things that we found actually was a lot of people will come around and say, oh, we want to move all our stuff to the cloud. Can you do that? But, it's more complex than that because there's a lot of different kinds of expertise involved in actually moving your GIS stuff or your data to the cloud. So, we found a lot of them were actually ending up putting together kind of teams of expertise. So you have cloud architects, Esri experts, FME experts, because somebody who's an expert in AWS might not actually be an expert in GIS data processes or different kinds of things. So kind of we noticed that building a multidisciplinary team had its advantages because you could really draw on the expertise of, okay, if I want to build this in the cloud, what would your software look like in the cloud? And so it's more in the end about that than it is finding the one GIS cloud architect expert that was going to build everything from A to Z or guide somebody through everything A to Z. So we found ourselves often as part of a multidisciplinary team as subject matter experts in this field. So in reality, there's actually multiple options of what it means to go to the cloud. So, if I think specifically in terms of FME server and FME desktop, or, in terms of the software we work with, there's actually multiple options. So you could install an FME server application on a cloud infrastructure like AWS or Azure. So you install it, you build it, you buy it, you own it, but it's in the cloud. Or there's FME Cloud. So what is FME Cloud? It's a software as a service. So it's very different. It's subscription based. So you don't have backend access to the machine. So each option has different, advantages and different technological implications so that had to be considered. As well, you could look at, FME desktop on a cloud machine as well. So you could have the enterprise application, you might have FME desktop on the cloud, maybe just to run processes, or maybe you're providing a full cloud environment and your desktop users will also be in the cloud. Or you could have FME server deployed on Docker in a cloud environment. So if you really wanted to go for containerization, so either FME server on Docker or, on Kubernetes, which are offering SAFE has put out there. So allows a lot of interesting elasticity, but more complicated architecture. So just looking at these 4 different options, that we see that what does going to the cloud mean before we, kind of line up with an option. So one of the first things that we realized was that actually sometimes some education was needed right at the beginning, and that education started often as what is the difference between FME Cloud, a software as a service, versus having a platform as a service and installing your own software on that platform. So a lot of the time people actually didn't really 100% understand, and we realized in asking questions that people didn't understand. They thought maybe FME Cloud was their own application they installed in their Amazon environment, but it wasn't the case. So that, even though it might seem obvious from a high level, of course we know what a SaaS is, of course we know what a Amazon environment is, we actually found a lot of people didn't really fundamentally understand the options, and we had to do some education. Another thing is that one of the primary things that people say is they want the idea of elasticity. We want elasticity in the cloud. But again, do you really need elasticity? And what does that actually mean for your data processing? Are you going to really be increasing the capacity and then decreasing the capacity? Is that really going to happen? Or do you have a steady pace? Because it might be we have sudden demand and sudden uptake that we need to be able to adapt to. Or it might just mean every week at a certain time I have a process that needs to run. Both those things can mean elasticity, but they might be deployed in very different ways. So, are we talking about an FME? So when we say, do you need elasticity, or is that what you're looking for in the cloud? And everybody says yes right away, we still have to figure out what that actually means. So you have FME server on the cloud. Are we looking at a Docker Kubernetes kind of setup with a lot of infrastructure, or are we just simply looking at an FME Cloud machine, which is a software as a service that we just turn on and off as we need, or add more machines or resize them as we need, or even decide how many engines are available to the processes. And if we turn the machines off, we're only paying storage fees, we're not paying software fees. So that as well is a form of elasticity, but they're very, very different setups and infrastructures. So, understanding what that means was a very important idea. So understanding what elasticity was in those cases. So here's an idea of what it might take to put up. Here's a container experiment done by SAFE, and I put the link to a blog SAFE did on setting up a Docker type system. This is one they did a year ago, so they didn't use Kubernetes in this one, but basically they had created a process that figured out how many processes to launch, automatically start a whole bunch of Amazon EC2 machines with Docker containers, have a whole bunch of engines suddenly running a whole bunch of jobs, and then all those little machines turned themselves off at the end as they weren't necessary in order to kind of demonstrate, elasticity using containerization. And it's a very interesting example. So if you have a very, large system with many processes that might go up and down on a regular basis, this could be an interesting setup. Or if you're already doing, using Docker for your other applications, then it could be an interesting setup, but you do have to set the infrastructure up. So you have to consider whether it really fits your needs. So that comes to our considerations in choosing a cloud solution. So what we found is, came back was, different sort of themes in helping people, choose or evaluate how their different options might look.
Well, if you have any questions, just a reminder, because this is like the second part of the webinar as of right now. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask them, and I'll try and have Leslie answer them during their presentation. Thank you. Keep going.
So, infrastructure considerations. What is moving to the cloud? Is it everything? So some clients are looking to move all of their infrastructure, their databases, their desktop applications, their server applications. They're actually moving all their infrastructure to the cloud. And others are just moving one project to the cloud. I want to have a data dissemination tool, or I want to publish something out to the cloud, but it's a singular project. So, data processing on the fly, for instance, versus moving all my data processing and my data to the cloud. Azure versus AWS. Most of the time when we're working with people as subject matter experts in this is, the choice is already taken, by their cloud architects on like, are they lining themselves up with an Amazon or an Azure type of system. Those tend to be the two main ones that we've seen people uptaking for cloud environments. So right now, I would say, like, if we're considering in the FME's world, AWS has a lot of interesting integration with the FME server, with the enterprise platform, and even with desktop. There's a lot of interesting tools that you could connect to Amazon's S3, to their queue service, to their notification service. So if you have a larger system, that could be an interesting option. But we do see that support for Azure in the same kind of way is building up as well. So support for Azure Block Storage and some things like that. Safe is adding more support. So it depends also what your time frame is. So a lot of the time, that kind of choice, if they're moving to a platform in the cloud, is taken. But these are things that if you are considering it, you might want to look at. This is an example of, so if I'm moving a project to the cloud, a lot of people would come and say, oh, I want to do a clip, zip, and ship type application in the cloud. I need FME Cloud. But often it's more than just I need FME Cloud. There's actually all the parts and pieces of that application you have to consider. So this is an example from SafeSite that I thought was interesting because it shows in pretty simple terms, like what that kind of setup looks like. So we have, the FME Cloud, or an FME server in an Azure, in an AWS, in this case. But I'm also, there's also the PostGIS database and the raster imagery stored in an S3 bucket. So there's actually multiple cloud components to this. There are cloud databases, there's a web server, to receive requests. There's the FME Cloud that processes the requests, and it speaks to the data sources, either the S3 buckets with the raster or the database. So I actually have multiple cloud components that need to communicate to each other to consider, not just one thing usually. There are also data considerations. So where is the data? Is it internal? Then maybe I'll have to open ports or firewalls or proxies to make my data processing tool that's in the cloud able to speak to that data. Or am I going to host the data in the cloud? Is it going to be on a cloud database? Or is it going to be a database in a cloud environment? Those might be different ways to have to connect to these applications. Do I have files to manage? Am I going to put them in a cloud file storage type system like S3? Do I have APIs to speak to? I need to make sure my applications can connect to each other. And that my cloud data processor, whether it's FME Cloud or an FME in the cloud, needs to be able to speak to this data, and these are considerations. So also, what is the nature of the processing? So one of the things that, am I doing heavy raster or point cloud processing where I need lots of memory and faster machines? Or am I doing many, many small transformations? So, a geodata process could be clipping enormous LiDAR files like in the previous slide, or it could be pulling a simple record from Salesforce that has a latitude, longitude, creating a point out of it and doing quick overlay, sending it out to ArcGIS Online, maybe with many, 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 many very small geodata processes. So that will be a consideration of how many processors do I need versus the size of those processing machines. And then there's software considerations. Are there required software dependencies? Some of my data processes might require third-party software applications or licenses to work. If I'm working with a SaaS like FME Cloud, I might need to re-strategize how I'm reading my data because I won't be able to install third-party software on my machine. So if I was connecting to an Oracle database, I might use a JDBC driver way of connecting. I might not use I might not be able to install an Oracle client. Things like that have to be considered when I'm comparing the SaaS option versus the other options. And then there's licensing and cost considerations. So do I go with a subscription or an ownership? If I buy an FME server and I host it in the cloud, I own the software, I'm paying maintenance on it, and I'm paying for every processing tool. If I buy a subscription, I pay for what I need to use. But some of the subscription models might not be adapted yet to all the elastic possibilities. So if I was going for a super, like a Kubernetes type of setup, like maybe the software licensing hasn't caught up yet. I have to look into what my licensing options are. Do I go, because I could get software as a subscription or ownership, or I could buy the SaaS. So I also have to consider that if I'm hosting data in the cloud, I'm moving data around, I'm processing data, I have to send it to my processor, and moving around the data itself may have some costs. So depending on the size of that data, that may be very, very, very small and insignificant, or it might be something I have to actually consider. So, and here we see that, even FME Cloud comes with two options, hourly pay as you go, or an annual rate where you save 40%, but now you could just let your machine run 24 hours a day all year long. So, but, the 40% might not be worth it. It might still be cheaper to go for hourly. If I have a machine that I only want to run between business hours, let's say, for instance, it would be cheaper to pay hourly than it is to pay over the whole year. And one of the things that's more complex sometimes is when I'm considering the licensing and cost considerations is that, if you go software to software, it might look like FME Cloud is more expensive, but then when you consider that FME Cloud includes the infrastructure that the FME server is on, you have to consider that you're paying for a machine and you're paying for the FME server. So you actually have to consider, all the costs going in, the cost of the infrastructure and the cost of the software. And you also have to consider cost of maintaining it as well. So a lot of people come to me and say, all right, tell me how much I need to buy. I need to know how many processors I need. I need to know how much to buy. And a lot of the time, it depends, because with the cloud, we could buy more processors, run them not all the time. There's a lot more options. Before we would buy a server and then try to maximize use of that machine. Now we choose how much we need, but now we need to be able to think about the costs of our processing in a different way sometimes. So I often give the example of distance and time and velocity. If you can give me two of those, I can give you the third. So if I know how much data you need to process, like how quickly, well, then it's easier to figure out how much you need to buy or what it's going to cost. So you actually have to think about what is the value of my data processing as well. Like, what is the value of having the data available every day versus every week? So you have to look at your data processing in a different way than you might have looked at it before. Here's an example of a one-time data data process. We had an FME process, and we calculated that it was a one-time thing, and we calculated that if we ran 24 hours of processing on an FME cloud and we loaded the data twice, because we loaded the data, figure out something's wrong with it, and load it again, it would cost about $1,000, which sounds like a lot, but it's a lot less than if we had to purchase an FME desktop, pay maintenance on it for several years, and then pay for an infrastructure on Azure to keep that FME desktop. So if I don't have immediate plans to use that FME desktop for other purposes, it would still be way cheaper to run one time on FME Cloud. So sometimes you really have to do the calculation to see what makes more sense. So we'll finish by looking at a little case really quickly. So we looked at how this client was using their current FME setup and see what were their options going to the cloud and what would those look like. So they had a lot of FME desktop processes that were driven and automated using Python scripts that came out to about 40 hours a week. So this was about a high level look at what their options were. So, they used Azure enterprise databases, so some very specific formats. They were delivering data weekly. It used to be daily, but it had become weekly with time. And then the data products are for internal clients and for the public. So we didn't just look at what they were currently doing. We were like, where did they need to go, or where did they want to go? So they wanted to be able to go back to offering maybe the data daily. They wanted to know, what would it take to do that? And also in the future, they were producing a whole bunch of data packages, but said there were other requests for, ad hoc data packages, but, they wanted to be able to offer, a clip, zip, and chips data processing on the fly. So served a little bit more to specific needs that maybe they didn't have to produce an entire data package over the whole federal, jurisdiction for, very specific types of requests. So maybe a combination of offering prepackaged data or offering some on-the-fly processing would serve their clientele better in the future. So what we did is we looked at those options I mentioned at the beginning. What might FME and data processing look like in the cloud environment? And we looked at what were the considerations in each of those environments to give them an idea of what they would face going forward, depending on what they chose. So they were looking at building an AWS environment. And so we looked at FME desktop on AWS. Could they do a pure lift and shift? That was their first question. Could we just move to the cloud and keep doing what we were doing? So the answer turned out to be yes, but you must move all of your data sources and destination to the cloud or make them available to the cloud machine during the processing. So the FME desktop on the cloud could continue running, being driven by the Python scripts. It could continue doing what they're currently doing, but you need to consider that all those data sources, SQL Server databases, Azure databases, that data needs to be available to the machine processing. You can't do on-demand processing in this case with the desktop application without doing a bunch of custom coding, which would not be, a well-recommended way to do, multi-user demand processing. So that would be their option on desktop. Their option of FME server on AWS, FME server being an enterprise application, it can still connect to their proprietary formats. Same challenges as the desktop, need access to the data. So either you're moving your data to other Amazon machines that are in that cloud, or moving them to cloud databases, or opening access via some route. But basically that could also work. Being an enterprise application, it would give them the option to, deploy on-demand data processing as well as scheduled processing. So that gave them some of what they wanted to do in the future, which could be interesting. We looked at FME Cloud, so the SaaS, the software as a service. We would need to provide access to the data sources if they used FME Cloud. So, the FME Cloud machine, which sits on its own Amazon EC2 environment, separated than the other Amazon environment, they would have to open access to the data. They would need to re-architect the GIS data processes that require Azure licensing. So they would have to speak through REST services and web services. So it is doable, but they would have to do more work on their FME processes. FME Cloud is super easy to deploy and manage. So in terms of deploying this enterprise application, it's as simple as signing up for the service and requesting the build of a machine. So that was an interesting option. Where it was FME Cloud could have been interesting for them was in the clip, zip, and ship. If they wanted to offer on-demand processing, this was like a pure cloud solution kind of catered to that kind of system. It could be interesting for that. And then there was FME Server on Docker or Kubernetes, because Elasticity had been brought in as one of the requests, but in considering that they were doing about 40 hours a week of processing, it was too complex of an installation and, versus the benefits they would necessarily gain. The group was not necessarily mature enough in their usage of cloud, and that's something we've seen. A lot of groups started with, a vision of something very complex using, Elasticity. But since they're just starting on the cloud, we found a lot of people realizing that, okay, they're going to start a little bit more simple and have a vision to scale up as they go through, because it can be complex putting that kind of system in. And for the amount of processing that this group was doing, we judged it to be too complex from a high level. They don't do enough processing to justify it. So in conclusion, one of the things that we realized was, education was an important factor, really understanding what the options were, build a team of experts. So we're finding that, a lot of people have different expertise in different parts and pieces of it, but to build, to send your data processes to the cloud, you're thinking about the data processing software itself, like FME, but you're also thinking about where you're hosting your data, giving access to it. So it requires really like a team of expertise. And then the consideration. So infrastructure, where's the data going to be? The software, licensing, what does elasticity really mean? And then strategy. So kind of scaling down and saying, what is the short-term versus the midterm and the long-term vision of moving your data processing to the clouds? And honestly, do you want to be an innovator? Like everybody who works in technology, your natural gut instinct is to say, yeah, I want to be an innovator. But I mean, if you have a small group, is it really worth, being the one figuring it out? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. You have to consider the capacity of your group, what you have to deliver. Does it make sense to be first in or maybe second in? So those are thoughts that I'll leave you guys with, and hopefully it gives you some ideas of what the thought processes people have been going through in the past year as they're moving their stuff to the cloud. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Leslie. Thank you everyone for being here. That concludes the webinar. We're gonna stay a bit, 1 or 2 minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Leslie and I will try to answer them. Well, actually more Leslie than I, but I'm there to look at the questions. So if not, or you can also send an email to Leslie. This is our email address, lesliem@consortech.com. So you can also reach her by email. All right, so I guess Leslie's presentation was clear enough. So thank you again for being